So, the big nightmare behind me is open, because today I am going to shuffle some servers around. This is my little TerraMaster NAS. TerraMaster sent it to me, and I talked about it in a previous video, link up here. And this is currently doing basically nothing, and I'm going to change that. Guess I should back up a bit. I currently have 10 servers in the house doing server things, and I'd like to reduce that number down to 7. First up, I got Big Store. I've made a video about him before, link up here to that video. This is my Proxmox backup server. It has my 4 SAS drives, stores my backups, also has my tape, video up here about the LTO tape adventure. This one's just going into the closet. It's running fine. I love it. Next up, we have Mega Lab, which is my open bench test here, and it's also doing fine, so we're going to leave that there. And that is running Proxmox 8, and it is doing Proxmox stuff. This, the TerraMaster NAS, is also running Proxmox 8, and I've been using it basically just to film videos. So I made a video about setting it up. It has a 500 gig NVMe drive in it, in two terabyte WD RED drives, which run fine. I've been using it as sort of a test bed, but I really only use it when I'm making a video about running software on Proxmox. And I can do that on any of my Proxmox systems. The only reason I use this one is because it doesn't have much on it. So this is basically doing nothing for me right now. So in the closet behind me, I've got my OpenSense firewall. That's going to stay. Nothing wrong with that. Also in the closet behind me, I have my 3-node cluster video up here on that one. That's the one I've used to turn into my Proxmox cluster test. It's also the one I test Ceph with. And I actually have a virtualized 5-node cluster running on Mega Lab as well that I can test cluster stuff on too. So that one's currently powered off, but I have a Ceph project coming up, so that's going to get powered back on soon. Also in the closet behind me, I have a node called Minilab. Minilab is my first home server. Well, that's my second. It's my first Proxmox server. So it's a, well, you'll see it in a few minutes. But basically that runs Home Assistant, Frigate, my MQTT broker, InfluxDB, and it has been running it for a very long time. So it has like 80 gigs of data on InfluxDB, which is an insane amount of data just to be collecting from Home Assistant. Also chilling in the closet, I have my rack mount server. There's another video up here on that one. That one is called Iridium. That is it's an AMD construction equipment CPU, APU. It's my TrueNAS server. So anyway, I'm kind of upset with TrueNAS for being TrueNAS as usual. I want to get off of TrueNAS and onto Proxmox for my storage. I made a video, another link up here in the cards, on setting up a storage server in Proxmox. Pretty good NAS video. And I'd like to use that. And at the same time, I want to move my some of my Home Assistant stuff from Home Assistant OS onto Home Assistant Core, which is the Python base instead of the OS based Docker based system. So I can have more control of it because I don't really use add-ons anyway. I basically do everything externally, so I don't really have a need for the Home Assistant OS. And getting rid of that will get rid of the VM layer that I have running for that. I'm also doing some testing of Frigate on the Zima board now. That's the 10th computer, is a Zima board. And so Frigate will eventually move on to this system as well. So basically I'm going to consolidate Minilab, this, and Iridium, the TrueNAS server, just to be on this. So this is a really low power NAS box. It's got two 2.5 gig ports, 2 USB 3, HDMI, and DC jack. And then internally it's got 2 NVMe drives, both with 4 PCIe lanes to the CPU, and it's got 2 SATA bays. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to have I have a 500 gig NVMe drive in here, and it's going to stay. In the second NVMe slot, I'm going to put my Coral TPU, which is for Frigate. And in these 2 drives here, I'm going to put the 2 6 terabyte drives that I have in Iridium, the file server. And to avoid disruption to people, I'm going to do this in 2 steps. First, I'm going to take down Home Assistant, which will make everyone unhappy because all the lights will stop working. They'll stop being automated. They won't stop working. And if they're not automated, they basically don't exist, and people won't use them. They'll just live in the dark. So those are going to turn off for a little bit. I'm going to migrate that over because I need to take the Coral TPU out of that node and put it into this one. Then I'm going to boot this one up and migrate the VMs over. I'm just going to restore a backup from PBS. So I'm going to do a backup, shut it down, then restore the backup onto this node. Once that's good and running again, then I'm going to shut down Iridium because that interrupts video production when I don't have my video storage. Take the physical drives out of TrueNAS and put them in here. They're already ZFS formatted. I can just bring in the pool and share it. So that's basically how today is going to go, and let's see if that ends up happening or not. This video is sponsored by ProtoArc. and their XKM-01 foldable full-size keyboard and mouse. Are you a sysadmin on the go who's sick and tired of carrying around a USB keyboard and mouse to work on computers? With a ProtoArc XKM-01, you can whip out the handy carrying case, pop out the included USB dongle, and unfold the full-size wireless keyboard and mouse for those emergency server operations. Or maybe, like me, you routinely rebuild your computers for fun. The XKM-01 can fold out of the way when not in use and supports both a USB dongle as well as 2 Bluetooth profiles, easily switched for both the keyboard and the mouse. This is great for reducing clutter on my workbench. Both the keyboard and mouse can be charged over USB-C, just like all of your modern gadgets, and the mouse includes a pocket for the dongle as well. The included carrying case fits the keyboard and mouse comfortably in my backpack, ready to help in whatever tech support quest I have to deal with today. Check out my link in the video description to get yours today. So everyone, this is Minilab, my first ever Proxmox server. It is an ASRock A300 Desk Mini with an AMD Ryzen 2400G Raven Ridge APU. Some of you may say, what is the A300 chipset? I thought AMD only made A300, B350, and what was the other one? X370 and X399. A300 is not actually a chipset, it's a chipset. What it basically means is we take all the I/O on the Zen CPU die and we run it out to the connector as is with no chipset. So the Zen die has some SATA, some PCIe, some USB 3, and basically, and 3 display ports. So we take DisplayPort, we get DisplayPort HDMI. It has a built-in DisplayPort to VGA converter chip on board. That's not part of the chipset though. There's a Realtek NIC that's on a PCIe lane, and there are USB 3 ports. And that's it. Internally, there is an M.2 Wi-Fi slot, an M.2 NVMe slot, and 2 SATA ports, and all of them go straight to the CPU. So essentially this is a Zen CPU broken out into a little circuit board. And I bought this thing many years ago when I was planning on 3D printing my own computer, because the motherboard is so small that it'll fit within the print volume of my Prusa i3. This is back before I had the bigger printer, and an ITX board was not an option for the bigger printer. So I bought this, and I was going to have it down here, and my plan was to build an electronics workshop down here, and I was going to have a monitor for looking up schematics and doing internet and stuff. This was going to be the computer. I was going to 3D print with it, and quickly this turned into a server, as does everything else in my life. So yeah, it has been decommissioned. I already did backups from here onto the backup server. I flagged them all. What's the flag called? They're all flagged as protected, so the backup server won't clean them up automatically. I gave them all a name that said they were for migration, so this server is decommissioned. I don't have to do anything more to it. So now comes in Terra. So all I'm going to do to Terra is take it apart and put in one of the 2 Coral TPUs. So this has 2 Coral TPUs in it. One is a M.2 Wi-Fi and one is an M.2 SSD key. So I'm going to take the SSD key one out and put it into Terra. And I'm going to take the Wi-Fi one out and I'm going to put it upstairs in the Zima board that I'm using to test Frigate. So let's get started. So let's get the Coral TPUs out of here. This is like the easiest PC case ever to take apart. There's 4 screws and the motherboard slides out. So I'm going to get these 4 screws. And there's a little connector for the power switch. Nice. So this is the Coral on the M.2 carrier in the SSD key. And this is the dual Coral in the Wi-Fi key. The dual Coral is a bit weird. It's so the Wi-Fi key has a number of I/O on it, including USB, SDIO, and 2 separate PCIe by 1 lanes. So the Coral TPU has 2 separate TPUs, each of which is a PCIe by 1, but most boards only wire one of the 2 PCIe lanes. It's not that it's a 2-lane PCIe, it's 2 separate PCIe by 1s. And this board only has one of them wired, so only one of the TPUs works, which means I have 2 TPUs instead of 3. But I was very aware that it probably wouldn't work, and it cost about the same price, and the Wi-Fi key was one of the only ones I could buy, so it is what it is. Just going to keep this screw here for safekeeping. And pop you out. You're going to need you to put your screw back in for safekeeping. I love how this has just a big front panel I/O connector here. It doesn't have like the individual little wires you get on modern PCs. And this just slides. How does it slide? Like that. Slides back in. Nice. So this is officially retired. I can now use it for other projects. So you may recall taking this apart's pretty easy. I'm going to pull the 2 drives out first. I'm actually going to keep the drives out because I'm going to swap from the 2 terabyte WD Reds to the 6 terabytes that I already have in Iridium. But I'm going to do that after I get Home Assistant up and running again. So we're migrating 1 server at a time here. Come on. Screw feels a little bit stripped. Come on, there we go. Okay. And whoop. Ah! It's a stripped one anyway, I don't need that one. Okay, so here we've got the 960 Evo and my 8 gig extra RAM. There's 4 gigs of RAM on the back, so 12 gigs. So this system has 12 gigs of RAM, so I'm going down from 16 to 12. And I'm also merging from 2 16 gig systems, the ZFS TrueNAS system and the Proxmox system. But at the same time, I'm migrating everything to containers, so I'm not going to have my Frigate VM and I'm not going to have my Home Assistant VM. They're going to be containers now in the new setup. So I got my 960, this is the 500 gig drive. This is an upgrade too. The other system only had a 240 gig drive, and it was only SATA, not NVMe. So here's the, oh, I need that screw. Here's the other slot, and here is my Coral. Let's get you back home. I'm going to plug the fans back in. Okay, so this is set up now. I got 2.5 gig LAN and a USB 3. So another reason I'm much more open to switching to the TerraMaster now is because I got a new desktop. Another video up here in the cards. And I'm limited to 2.5 gig there. So previously I had 5 gig up there and 10 gig down here to the Iridium server. So if I connect this with 2.5 gig to the switch, then I have 2.5 gig from here to there, and from there to my desktop. So I still maintain 2.5 gig path for video files. I'm going to hook the second 2.5 gig up to the private LAN that's used by the Ceph cluster, so it can do storage and stuff. So then I can use this as like bulk storage of whatever I need when I'm doing Ceph testing. And then I'm going to use USB 3 with that stupid cable I bought to make a short. This thing. I bought this USB 3 data transfer cable, and it really kind of sucks. You barely get over a gigabit with it. But I'm going to use that to connect from here to Big Store, direct. So all of my Proxmox backups will go direct to Big Store, and they'll cut out the switch entirely, which means that doesn't mean anything for this system, because this system wouldn't care. But it means on Big Store's side, it has 2 gigabit paths, one that's gigabit to the switch and one that's gigabit to this. So since a lot of the backups are coming from the TerraMaster and some of them are coming from Megalab at the same time, it'll split bandwidth for backups to Big Store. So that's what's going on with this setup once I get it set up. And yeah, let's get it booted up and see what it looks like. So it's a new day. I got the new server set up. Well, newish server. Server in a new role set up. I also took the backup server and I moved it into the closet, so it's chilling in there happily. So I got room to work today. Basically, I just restored the backups from PBS onto the Proxmox system and started them, and that was it. Nothing else to talk about. It just worked. All the settings imported, they had the same MAC address because that's part of the config file. You can choose to import them to a new number, and it'll by default pick a new number for them, but I manually set them back to the number they used to be. So in Proxmox backup server, they'll still retain the same backup history and everything. So yeah, everything's working again. I did testing to make sure all of my Z-Wave and Zigbee devices are working again, and they are doing great. And everything at MQTT is doing fine. The stuff that needed Node-RED, some of my old Home Assistant stuff, I started with Node-RED before I was in Home Assistant, and that's all working too. So it just worked. So now it's time to move the file server. So last night I had the file server kick off a backup to the Proxmox backup server, and that ran. And then this morning, just before I shut it down, I had it kick off a backup to itself. So there's two 6 terabyte drives and one 5 terabyte drive. And before I had a Proxmox backup server and I was doing good backups, I would back up the video data from the 6 terabyte pool to the 5 terabyte drive, just as a copy operation. And I did that, so I'm going to keep the 5 terabyte drive separate, and I'm not going to mess with it. So it'll be another backup of anything that's changed in the last couple of hours, which shouldn't be anything. I didn't upload any video files or anything. So it'd be minor changes that I'm not sure what they are, but it's possible. So let's get it out of the rack and get started. Getting the server out of the rack is always a pain because the direct attached copper cable for 10 gig interacts with the PCIe slot bracket, so it can't come out. So when I tug on this retention clip, it gets stuck on the slot cover for that PCIe slot, which is really unfortunate. So I can't get it out without taking the card out of the machine. So I had to pull the whole thing out with this 2-meter DAC cable attached. I got the power cable too, but that one wasn't attached. So let's take this apart and see what's inside. So I made a video about this system a long time ago, and there's probably a link to it somewhere, or maybe there was earlier in the video. But basically, this is my first TrueNAS system. So I built this as soon as I got out of college. So it's got an AMD excavator, pile driver, something like that. It's a 4-core, 4-thread CPU. It's got a full-size PCIe X16 slot, which I think is running it by 2. Maybe it's running it by Gen 3 by 8 or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And that's what I got my 10 gig card in. So this is an Intel X520. 16 gigs of RAM, I think. Yeah, 16 gigs DDR3. Pico PSU. These two are 6 terabyte drives and a ZFS mirror. This is the boot drive because TrueNAS refuses to boot off your data drives. And then a 5 terabyte desktop drive. And this was my backup before I got the backup server. So my goal today is to take these two hard drives out and put them in these hard drive cages to put them into the Terra server. Then I'm going to import the ZFS pool as is and go from there. These toolless drive trays from TerraMaster are really easy. Just pop this like pin piece out on both sides. And it just comes right off. These drives were manufactured in February of 2018. I bought them not that long after that. I bought them in summer of 2018. So the system wasn't on full time in 2018 and 2019. But in 2020 it got set up as this and it's been running that way ever since. So these have had a lot of power on hours. They haven't had a lot of power cycles because they run full time. Fun fact, the 10 terabyte SAS drives that I bought for the backup server, they have less power on hours than these. And I bought those used. So some company had retired them after 3 years of power on hours, and these are getting close to 3.5 to maybe even 4 years. So it's time to replace these 6 terabyte drives, at least for critical stuff. So my plan is, well, I was hoping to migrate to Ceph sooner rather than later. Not sure if that's going to end up happening sooner or if that'll end up happening later. But in any case, what I'm probably going to do is buy a pair of something between 10 and 16 terabyte drives and do the ZFS mirror replace method, where I take one drive out and replace it with another one, resilver, take the other drive out and replace, resilver, and then I end up with a mirror pair that's been upgraded. So that's my plan for these 6 terabytes. They're going in for now. I'm going to upgrade relatively soon, either to Ceph or to some bigger drives. You ever watch your own YouTube video to remember how to do something? I'm installing Cockpit, the file server from my Pretty Good NAS video. I'm watching my own video to remember how to do it. So now that the system is up and running, Sherlock and I are going to give you an overview of what it looks like. So here's the system. CPU usage is higher than I would like. I'm not entirely sure what's using all of that now. RAM usage looks about right for ZFS, so I'm not worried about that one. This VM and these 2 containers are what I had on the old system, and then Iridium is the new container that replaced the old Iridium TrueNAS server. So a bit of history. I started using FreeNAS back in 2018 on the Iridium system, and I was quickly kind of unhappy with it. I used BSD jails for a while, but it was hard to find software that ran well in BSD compared to Linux. So I switched to Ubuntu 18, and I ran LXC containers manually and Samba manually. And so some of these LXC containers have been moved into Proxmox since then. So Telstar is one of them. That was my first home automation system. I based it around Node-RED and MQTT. And later on I added InfluxDB and other stuff to it. But originally it was just going to be MQTT based, and MQTT is this like stateless message passing protocol. So I named it after this. So this got backed up from the original system, got imported into Proxmox, and been running ever since. I also have a AP controller that's for my wireless APs from TP-Link Omada. I have the older software because I have older APs that aren't supported by the newer ones because they don't do great with backwards compatibility at TP-Link. Even if their current hardware stuff is pretty good. Mirror, that is the Home Assistant server. So Home Assistant, obviously Home Assistant OS is something I've used for a couple years now. And I'm going to migrate that eventually to be a container as well because I don't really need the additional add-on features of the Docker system that they have. But for now it's still a VM, and I'm going to keep it that way. And last but not least, Iridium. So Iridium used to be the physical server, and for reasons I didn't want to change the name because it's connected to by so many things around the house that connect to it over Samba. So I took the old DNS name for Iridium and I moved it to the new container and same IP address. So the container now fills the role that the server used to fill. All the shares should be the same. You just have to reconnect, same users, passwords, everything. So essentially followed my video on installing Cockpit on Debian 12 instead of 11. And that worked pretty well. I did a couple things though that I'll show here. So here's Cockpit, it's running. So I have file sharing set up. In my case, I enabled macOS access, which turned on Fruit and set some more Fruit settings to make Mac happy. And I had to do this to make my iPhone happy because part of my workflow is to upload files from my iPhone directly to the file server. I also set shadow copy turned on, and so I have this set to use the format that Sanoid uses. So if I pop up with a view here, so this is project folder. If I look at this in Windows, previous versions, you can see there's 3 versions of it every half hour. That one was a mistake. To do one of the complications of the unprivileged container that I didn't realize would be such a troublesome thing when I made the previous video, it was UID and GID mapping. So unprivileged containers run at 100,000, and dealing with UIDs that are shared between containers can be challenging. So I didn't want to just make it privileged. So I followed this tutorial on Proxmox to ID map. In my case, I ID mapped ID 1000, which is user projects on all of the systems, so that I basically just have to ID map on the add group. So the Samba users all have to be a member of group 1000, and that'll give them permissions on the host system, UID, GID 1000, which I can then set in ZFS. So my data sets for bulk data, my video, projects, personal data, That is all outside of the Proxmox system, and it's in separate ZFS datasets. So I'm essentially doing ZFS management manually for those and backups and things like that using Proxmox Backup Client. So I'm using Sanoid to take ZFS snapshots, and it's taking them every half hour. So there's different configurations you can do, but I told it to keep the last 144 half-hour snapshots, so that turns out to 3 days. So in Shadow Copy in Windows, you get the last 3 days as 144 snapshots, which is an outrageous number. So if you delete a file on accident, you'll probably be able to find it. I'm also keeping the last month worth of dailies and then 3 months worth of monthlies. So that's a lot of snapshots. Another thing that's come up is my power usage has gone down as a result of this. So there's 2 different power circuits that power that area downstairs. So if I look here, this is shop lights. This is what is in the room with the storage closet. So it used to be at about 205 watts or so, but it could peak up to 210 or maybe more than that if it was doing heavy work. So now today, after all is said and done, these big flickers here are actually the lights themselves. Now we're running at about 214, 213. So we added about 10 or 15 watts to this circuit. Now the shop plug circuit is a different one. This is where the backup server used to be. So the backup server here was pulling 90 watts. And then these spikes are other things happening. So now the backup server moved from the shop plug circuit to the shop light circuit. Our power went down to 33 watts. So I took away 60 watts here, and I moved things around here. So the backup server got added, the Iridium server got deleted. So all in all, I'm saving about 50 watts. And so 50 watts is not nothing. I'm pretty happy about that. So finally, now that I'm done moving everything over to the new server, I'm going to take the server apart fully, scavenge all the parts, lay them all out so I can build new projects out of them. All my data has been migrated, so I don't need the backup copies anymore. Well, that's not true. The zpool moved to the new system, so that copy's good. The backup was always good because it's on the backup server, and I just did a tape backup like 2 days ago, so I have a 2-day-old tape backup, which is perfect. So the backup hard drive that used to be my only backup, that's now been duplicated by the backup server and by tapes, is obsolete. So I can take the 5 terabyte drive out. I got a Ziploc to hold all the screws, because little screws are such a pain. So this I think is held in, oh, yeah, it was held in with double-sided tape, I guess not anymore. So all of these parts are going to go into other servers someday as I build them. So this Intel X520, I have 2 of them now, so that's 2 10 gig cards, and I have a 25 gig card. So that would be enough to build a full 3-node cluster. Ideally I could put this in the backup server, but the backup server doesn't have enough slots for that. So this hard drive is actually still in part of its case, because you can see I shucked it from a USB chassis. Maybe I should put it back in the USB chassis, that would be useful, but I don't know, maybe not. I was hoping to use this drive for security cameras, because that's kind of stuff that doesn't need backups. If I have an important event happen on a security camera, I'll export that as a single file and save that. But in general, security data is basically worthless once it's created. At least that's my view on it. So this, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a Pico PSU. So it is an ATX connector with a power supply mounted. It takes a 12-volt input from a wall brick and feeds that straight on through to everything that takes 12 volts. So the regulators on board only do 5 volt, 3.3 volt negative voltages. So this one I think can do 120 watts. So I'm going to move this over to the Mega Lab. The Mega Lab is a 65 watt TDP system, or CPU. The only thing attached is the RAM, SSD, and the 25 gig card. So, and it's only running at 10 gig with 1 lane. So the reason for that is because the Mega Lab has a 500 watt SFX power supply, and I can use that to test the, well, you'll see in a sec. So this is going to go to that computer. That's where it's destined. I can take off all these extra Molex expanders because I won't need them anymore. I had to have a bunch of them to get all the SATA power I needed. This case had 2 fans in it, and they were super, super loud. So after I bought this case, I replaced one of them with a Noctua fan and unplugged the other one. So this little board, the, what is it? A68N5600. So this is I have no idea what model it is, but it's a AMD excavator processor. It's an ITX board. I'm going to try to use this to test the Xeon Phi. This has IOMMU support. It's about 10 years old of a processor design. And the Xeon Phi is about that old too. So I'm hoping that they go well together. If not, I can always test Megalab. But for the Xeon Phi, I really need a dedicated system because I'm going to have to be installing old versions of CentOS because they're designed for Red Hat. They're designed for Red Hat or SUSE. So my options are pretty much to run old CentOS. And yeah, so this has the PCIe slot I need for the Xeon Phi. So for those of you who haven't seen, this is my Intel Xeon Phi. It's a coprocessor. This is derived from the early Intel Larrabee GPU prototypes from about like 2009 or something like that. So this has a hell of a lot of cores. It does 4-way SMT, so 4-way multi-threading, and it has 60... It's just a couple less than 64. It's an odd number. But that's how many full cores it has, and each one does 4 ways, so that's like 244 threads or something stupid like that. This had a precursor to AVX 512 that is not the same and is not supported by GCC. It was only supported by GCC so they could build the Linux kernel for it because it runs Linux itself. So I'm hoping to get this thing running. I don't have any fans big enough. I bought some fans. They're not big enough. So I haven't had any hardware to do a full test. I was going to test it with my Threadripper, but that died. So we're going to see if this little AMD system is enough to just power on and host this, because I don't expect that to do much processing. But as long as it has the IOMMU features I need, the Xeon Phi should work. I got a 500 watt power supply. Hopefully that's big enough too, because this beast needs a ton of power. So I got a PCIe 8-pin and a PCIe 6-pin. And apparently this thing needs like 25 CFM of airflow, which is crazy. So I need some big, big blower fans. But yeah, this is going to be a future project. I'm hoping to get it to transcode ProRes, because in theory, hardware accelerated codecs like H.264 AV1 are really, really efficient if they work. If they're not hardware accelerated, though, you end up with some really high CPU load trying to encode and decode them. And if I do stuff in ProRes, then I'm probably going to want some sort of way to transcode all my files into ProRes and out of ProRes. That's not my desktop computer whirling away at it. So that's what I'm going to try to get this to do. I know there's a build of FFmpeg that runs on this. I don't know how well it runs. So this is upcoming, long-term, not near-term. I've extracted all this hardware from the old server. So at this point in the video, I'm down to 8 servers running. I still have the Zima board upstairs running Frigate. And that's going to keep running Frigate till I'm done doing testing of different ways of doing AI detection. So the TPU, the CPU detector, the OpenVINO detector. And I'm trying to benchmark those to get some data on them before I move Frigate down to this server. But it's eventually going to run on the server as well. And by then I'll be down to 7 servers. So aren't you proud of me for slimming down my home hub a bit? So yeah, as always, if you guys want to see more for future videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully I can get around to some of these projects soon, but the timetable is always variable. Message me on Discord. I have a Discord server link down below if you're interested. Discord's a great place to chat with me about all kinds of weird topics. What else? Oh, I have a Ko-fi if you're interested in tipping me. It's not like a monthly donation thing or anything like Patreon. It's just one time. And that's open if you're interested. And as always, I'll see you on the next adventure.